You are listening to We Saw the Devil, an investigative and conversational true crime podcast that deep dives into fascinating criminal cases that are solved, unsolved, or ongoing. From America's Lori Vallow to Germany's Armin Meiwes, we examine and discuss the world's most shocking cases. If you're enjoying the show, don't forget to follow us online. Check us out at WeSawTheDevil.com and We Saw the Devil on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram. And don't forget, you can become part of the show by backing us on Patreon. Hello, everyone. You are listening to We Saw the Devil. I'm Robin, and I'm here with the fourth and final episode from my Emmett Till series, Confession and Where Are They Now? As I discussed at length in previous episodes, the Emmett Till case was historically important because it became a true catalyst for the burgeoning civil rights movement in the American South. In this episode, I'd like to discuss the impact of Emmett Till's murder, as well as go over, what happened to all of the people involved, what happened to his murderers, the sheriff, the brave black men who testified, Emmett's mother, Mamie, and also, as I've touched on a couple times, Carolyn Bryant. But before we get into that, let's just get some really quick housekeeping out of the way. You can find our website at WeSawTheDevil.com. From there, you can also find our social media, send us an email, as well as get a link to our Patreon. And I have some Patreon news. Guys, I hired someone to manage our Patreon. So all of you patrons listening may see Renee floating about in our group, our Facebook group, or also on Patreon. If you have any questions, please do not hesitate to reach out to them. I finally got t-shirts with a new design in, and Renee is actually currently taking t-shirt orders. So if you are an executive producer, please make sure to check your Patreon email because we need updated t-shirt sizes so we can get that out. Also, stickers. All stickers have been mailed out as of today by my hand personally. So patrons, you should be receiving them within the next 3 to 5 days. Also, for a short time, I'm going to be giving stickers away. If you want a We Saw the Devil sticker, just please leave a 5-star review on whatever platform you listen to the show on and send the screenshot of that review in an email to info@WeSawTheDevil.com, and I will send that sticker out same day. If I owe you a sticker, or if you were a past patron who didn't get the new logo sticker while you subscribed, please email us at info@WeSawTheDevil.com so that we can get that out to you immediately. Now that I have actual help with the Patreon, things are getting out and going smoothly. But let's go ahead now and talk about Emmett Till. And guys, I'd like to start this episode with a little bit of a call out. If you follow our Facebook or follow our Twitter, you may have seen me post it. But I received a really nasty comment from a man by the name of Jack Kunkel. He is a Civil War author. If you look him up on Amazon, you can find his books that he's written about the Civil War. Typically, I don't believe in shaming people, but in this case, I'm going to make a little bit of an exception. He left his comment on a previous episode, and it says, quote, Emmett Till was very likely a budding Chicago thug, exactly like the thousands of them running the streets of Chicago today. His mama likely shipped him south because he was just one step ahead of the law. When he got there, he started popping off at his mouth about how they do things in Chicago, and he ended up in the river. That's the real story of Emmett Till. The rest is Hollywood. First, he misspells Emmett Till's name. Jack, if you are going to shit all over a 14-year-old child who was lynched, at least spell his name right. And secondly, fuck you. This is why covering cases and making sure people are aware of the history of this country is important. For someone who claims that they are a historian, you, sir, know jack and shit about history. Not only did both of Emmett Till's murderers admit and confess to murdering him, which is what this episode is actually going to be about, but a journalist who interviewed Carolyn Bryant not even a decade ago was told that she exaggerated what happened with Emmett Till and basically lied. First of all, this comment is much of a racist dog whistle. It's not even a dog whistle, it's just blatant. But I'm not sure when in America in 2022 saying that a child whistling at a woman, that child then deserves to be castrated, tortured, axed, shot, ears removed. In what world is that okay? So thank you, Jack Kunkel. You have just ensured that I cover even more cases like this, just to spite old troglodytes like yourself. And this stuff makes me so mad, too, because I am a Southerner. I grew up here. If you know me or you're close to me, guys, my very first memory as a human being on this planet. Everyone knows that I was adopted. Well, when my parents adopted me, they were living in a very, very, very small podunk little Tennessee town called Camden. Camden was in the middle of nowhere. And it also is very close to Nathan Bedford Forrest State Park. If you're not familiar, Nathan Bedford Forrest was basically the founder of the KKK. Lots and lots and lots of racism in Camden. My parents told me that there used to be a restaurant in Camden called the Cozy Corner Cafe. As you can imagine, all the letters lined up in a row, and it was KKK. Literally, Cozy Corner Cafe. My very first memory as a human being on this planet is being probably 3 or 4 years old, in the backseat in my car seat, coming up to a stop sign, and seeing a KKK member in full robe, hood and everything, with a bucket asking for money. That is quite literally my first memory as a human being. We ended up moving to Nashville when I was 6 years old in a pretty affluent suburb, and the neighbors across the street from us were Black. They still lived directly across from me. I was probably about 8 years old at this time when this happened, but we came in and there was a cross burning on the entrance to our subdivision, an actual cross burning. A few weeks after that, 2 men in a pickup truck actually followed my neighbor. They had a daughter. She was like 15 or 16 at the time. They actually followed her home shouting the N-word and to go home. You don't belong here. And this happened in Nashville circa like 1996, 1997. That's part of stuff that I've witnessed personally. It makes me so angry when people are just so hateful for absolutely no reason whatsoever. I mean, our friend Jack here probably had a Jefferson Davis statue like molded into a dildo. Who even knows? But I'm so tired of people like that. Remember in the previous episode how I discussed that the historical marker for Emmett Till's body, like the discovery of his body there on the Tallahatchie River, how people had riddled it with bullet holes? Yeah, the first one went up. It was riddled by more than 100 bullet holes, completely made illegible. It came down, and that original sign was given to the Smithsonian, because if you can't read the irony in white people shooting up at the sign marking a dead Black child's lynching, I don't know, like, you need help. Second sign, same thing, destroyed. Third sign, got completely shot and blown away only a month after it went up. Only 3 years ago, 3 University of Mississippi students were suspended from their frat house after posing in front of the sign with AR-15s and guns. By the way, their names are Ben LeClaire, Hal Logan, and John Lowe. One was posing with a shotgun, another with an AR-15, and another one was posing with a handgun. Thankfully, the sign currently is bulletproof. Really sad, right? That the lynched child sign, it has to be bulletproof to keep from getting shot up. Yet the man who castrated, murdered, tortured, and axed him to death, kept calling him the N-word, got acquitted of his murder. His marker gets flowers, guys. This is the America that we live in. That child historical marker gets 317 bullet holes and has to be put up 3 times, also donated to Smithsonian. Whereas a racist murderer who was boisterous, racist, and loud and proud about murdering a child gets flowers. And then comments by our friend Jack Kunkel here being like, well, he was a thug anyway. This is why I'm covering Emmett Till. This is why I will continue to cover cases like Emmett Till. Hashtag Black Lives Matter, you sentient pinecone. Whew, I feel better. So I left off the previous episode with J.W. Milam and Roy Bryant being acquitted, not only in the murder of Emmett Till, but with them not being indicted for his kidnapping, which, again, they admitted to it. They said gladly, yep, we did, but we just wanted to scare him. But again, the jury was like, nah, they didn't do it. In the original trial, it took the jury just 67 minutes for them to be acquitted. A 4-person on the jury even came out and boasted that it would have been even faster had they not decided to take a soda break during deliberation. And if that's not enough to sit and wrap your head around, it actually gets worse. Only a few months after Emmett Till's murder and that farce of a trial, Look magazine published a story called The Shocking Story of Approved Killing in Mississippi. In that interview, Roy Bryant and J.W. Milam fully confessed to killing Emmett Till. Not only that, but they were proud of it. Look magazine journalist William Bradford Huey paid each of the men $4,000 to discuss the case in an interview. He went into it, not knowing what would happen, and ended up with a full confession. And remember, because they were acquitted, they could never be tried for that crime again. William Bradford Huey said this about going into this interview. He said, quote, I met Milam and Bryant. We had this strange situation. We're meeting in the library of this law firm. Milam and Bryant are sitting on one side of the table. My lawyer, John Witten, and I are sitting on the other side. I'm not doing the questioning. Their own lawyer is doing the questioning, and he's never heard their story. Not once. He becomes as interested in the story as I am. I said, now I'm going to take some notes during the day, and I'm going to do two things. I'm going to be roughing out this story, and I'm also going where you say you went. I'm going to find evidence. Milam did most of the talking. Now remember, he's older. Milam was then 35 or 36. He was a first lieutenant in the U.S. Army Reserve at that time, and so Milam was a bit more articulate than Bryant was. Bryant did some talking, particularly when they talked about what they were told had happened at the store. But J.W. Milam did the killing. He fired the shot when they took Till down to the river and killed him. End quote. Over the course of a few hours, the men fully confessed. And I'm actually going to drop a link to the full article where you can read that story, the shocking story of a proved killing in Mississippi. Check the show notes if you want to read the full confession. But I'm going to read an excerpt from it now. The full article starts from the very beginning with Emmett Till meeting Carolyn Bryant in the store. It then follows the men kidnapping him from Moses Wright's house and taking him to the barn. At first, they apparently thought they were scaring him, but it became very, very clear very, very quickly that Emmett Till was not scared. So, starting with J.W. Milam, direct quote, "We were never able to scare him. They had just filled him so full of that poison that he was hopeless." And in that statement, he's talking about Chicago and the North, that they had filled him with confidence and thoughts of equality, that he was equal to white people. J.W. Milam was calling that a poison. Back of Milam's home is a tool house with 2 rooms of about 12 square feet. They took him in there and began whipping him. First Milam, then Bryant smashing him across the head with those .45s. Pistol whipping, a court-martial offense in the Army, but military police had been known to do it. And Milam got information out of German prisoners this way. But under these blows, Bobo never hollered, and he kept making the perfect speeches to ensure martyrdom. Bobo said, "You bastards, I'm not afraid of you. I'm as good as you are. I've had white women. My grandmother was a white woman." J.W. Milam in the interview said, quote, "Well, what else could we do? He was hopeless. I'm no bully. I never heard an N-word in my life. I like N-words. In their place. I know how to work them. But I just decided it was time a few people got put on notice. As long as I live and can do anything about it, N-words are going to stay in their place. N-words ain't going to vote where I live. If they did, they'd control the government. They ain't going to go to school with my kids. And when an N-word gets close to mentioning sex with a white woman, he's tired of living. I'm likely to kill him. Me and my folks fought for this country, and we got some rights. I stood there in that shed and listened to that N-word throw that poison at me, and I just made up my mind. Chicago boy, I said, I'm tired of them sending your kind down here to stir up trouble. God damn you. I'm going to make an example of you, just so everybody can know how me and my folks stand." About 1.5 miles southeast of the boys' home is a lonely spot where Big Milam has hunted squirrels. The riverbank is steep. The truck stopped 30 yards from the water. J.W. Milam ordered Bobo to pick up the fan. He staggered under its weight, carried it to the riverbank. They stood silently, just hating one another. J.W. Milam said, "Take off your clothes." Slowly, Bobo pulled off his shoes, his socks. He stood up, unbuttoned his shirt, dropped his pants, and then his shorts. He stood there naked. It was Sunday morning, a little before 7. J.W. Milam asked, "You still as good as I am?" Bobo said, "Yeah." J.W. Milam asked, "You still had white women?" Bobo said, "Yeah." That big .45 jumped in Big Milam's hand. The youth turned to catch that big, expanding bullet at his right ear. He dropped. They barbed wired the gin fan to his neck and then rolled him into 20 feet of water. And that is directly based on the confession of Roy Bryant and J.W. Milam. It's pretty rare in general to see a full murder confession in a magazine. The article caused shockwaves all over the world. Again, European newspapers were printing write-ups and excerpts to express the shock and shame at the allowed murder of a 14-year-old child in America. You know, this is right after World War II, and then here's America lynching children. And then his murderers are laughing about it in newspapers and magazines. But the letters to the editor, a lot came pouring in. One person from Mississippi said, "I want to cancel my subscription to your magazine at once. I will not have my home contaminated with filthy, dishonest articles." Another person from North Carolina said, "The South and many other sections of the country, thank you for your article. The killing was a most unfortunate affair to be true. More unfortunate was the failure of the press to give an unbiased, objective report of the whole incident. No race in the world has made as much progress as the Southern Negro since he was set free as a slave 90 years ago. The Southern white man has contributed gladly to that advancement and will continue to do so. If social reformers who know little about our problem will let us work it out in our own way." A man from Illinois said, "To publish this story, of which no one is proud, but which was certainly justified, smacks loudly of circulation hunting. Roy Bryant and J.W. Milam did what had to be done, and their courage in taking the course they did is to be commended. To have followed any other course would have been unrealistic, cowardly, and not in the best interest of their family or country." Someone from Pennsylvania said, "If this case is not reopened and the guilty punished, I shall laugh at the word justice." Another person, a member of the military, said, "After reading this article, I am ashamed to admit that I am a Southerner." And what's so incredibly sad to me, too, is that every single time there is a murder of a person of color in this country, say by police, or we've even had lynchings in the last couple of years. Does the name Ahmaud Arbery ring a bell? When he was murdered by the two men while jogging in Georgia. Thankfully, justice prevailed in that case, but only after video was released. Because again, the quote-unquote good old boys club actually prevailed for a short period before his murderers were brought to justice. And letters to the editor, just like these back in 1956, are still around. They still happen. Just now, it's usually in the form of email or Facebook comments. After that article was published, there was relative silence in the Emmett Till case. Mamie Till and Moses Wright actually went on tour with the NAACP as paid speakers. Only 100 days after Emmett Till's murder, Rosa Parks refused to give up her seat to a white man on a Montgomery City bus and was arrested for violating Alabama's bus segregation laws. Rosa said that for a brief moment, she thought about going to the back of the bus, but then she thought about Emmett Till and she couldn't do it. In Montgomery, Alabama, the Women's Democratic Council called for a citywide boycott and asked a 26-year-old minister for assistance. His name? Reverend Martin Luther King Jr. Martin Luther King Jr. was so impacted by Emmett Till's abduction and lynching that he actually saw Mamie Till and Mose Wright speak at his church. He even gave a sermon talking about it. He said in his sermon, "The white men who lynched Negroes worship Christ. That jury in Mississippi, which a few days ago in the Emmett Till case freed two white men from what might be considered one of the most brutal and inhuman crimes of the 20th century, worships Christ. The perpetrators of many of the greatest evils in our society worship Christ. This trouble is that all people go to church regularly, they pay their tithes and offering, and observe religiously the various ceremonial requirements. The trouble with these people, however, is that they worship Christ emotionally and not morally. They cast his ethical and moral insights behind the gushing smoke of emotional adoration and ceremonial piety." In many of Martin Luther King Jr.'s speeches, he invoked Emmett Till's murder. He would say, "The crying voice of a little Emmett C. Till screaming from the rushing waters in Mississippi." Martin Luther King Jr. said, "I have a dream that one day this nation will rise up and live out the true meaning of its creed. We hold these truths to be self-evident that all men are created equal. I have a dream that one day even the state of Mississippi, a state sweltering with the heat of injustice, sweltering with the heat of oppression, will be transformed into an oasis of freedom and justice." This I Have a Dream speech, which is one of the most important speeches ever given in American history, was given on the 8-year anniversary of Emmett Till's murder at the March on Washington, August 28th, 1963, 8 years to the day after Emmett Till was killed. So where are they now? Let's start with Mamie Till. On June 24th of 1957, Mamie married Gene Mobley and was married to him for 43 years until Gene died in 2000. By the mid-1960s, Mamie's mother, Alma, formed the Emmett Till Foundation. In 1975, Mamie earned a master's degree in administration and supervision from Loyola University. She actually almost even completed a doctorate. Directly after the trial, she went on tour with the NAACP and then stopped for a period of time while she was going to school. But then she actually started picking up and doing national speaking engagements again in 1985. Jean died in 2000, and then Mamie actually started putting all of her efforts into the Emmett Till Foundation. She passed away after she had a heart attack on January 5th, 2003 at age 81. And if you want to know more about her memoir, was published posthumously, and it's called Death of Innocence, the story of the hate crime that changed America. I read it while researching these episodes, and if you read one book this summer, let it be hers. She is absolutely, without a doubt, one of the bravest, strongest women that I have ever heard of. I cannot imagine losing my child in such a heinous way on such a public stage and having to travel from Chicago to the deep South to face people who outwardly call me racial slurs and threaten to kill me. I mean, she is just an incredible, incredible woman. Mose Wright immediately fled for Chicago after the trial. If you recall in the previous episode, I talked about how he narrowly escaped being lynched himself. The same day that the trial concluded, Mose Wright was on a train on the way to Chicago, and an angry mob showed up at his small little shack looking for him to kill him because he testified and identified J.W. Milam. Well, he actually traveled with Mamie for a while with the NAACP and talked about the Emmett Till case. His wife Elizabeth died in 1970, and then Mose's health began to also deteriorate shortly thereafter. He was unable to care for himself after a bit, and so his family put him in the White Oak Nursing Home in Indian Head Park, and he died there on August 3rd, 1977. Willie Reed, the 18-year-old boy who heard Emmett Till's screams and cries from being beaten in that barn and testified that he saw and talked to J.W. Milam at the scene, well, he also immediately fled to Chicago after the trial, except he completely disappeared from public view. And Willie did not keep in touch with Mamie or Mose or anyone related to the case. He just moved to Chicago by himself and actually had a complete nervous breakdown shortly after arriving. Way later on in 2007, he gave an interview and he said, quote, "That's something you never put out of your mind. I remember it like it happened yesterday." Willie ended up changing his name out of fear that angry white men from Mississippi would try to hunt him down out of revenge. In 1959, he got a job at Chicago's Jackson Park Hospital as an orderly, and he actually worked there for 47 years before retiring in 2006. While working at the hospital, he met a nurse's aide, and they ended up getting married. And she had no idea who he was or that he was integral in one of America's biggest trials until more than 10 years into their marriage. In 2001, Willie took part in the documentary The Untold Story of Emmett Lewis Till, and then after that interview, he began to talk more freely about the case and what had happened. You can find several clips of him all over YouTube. Willie Reed died in July of 2013 at age 76. The violently racist Tallahatchie sheriff, Henry Clarence Strider, the man who testified for the defense at the trial, well, he actually survived an assassination attempt in 1957. He was sitting in his car when someone actually tried to shoot him. They shot at him, and the bullet hit the side of his car close to his head. Strider would go on and loudly proclaim, until the day he died, that the shooter was someone dispatched from Chicago's branch of the NAACP. Strider planned to run for office again in 1959, just 4 years after the trial. However, his wife convinced him not to out of fear for their safety, out of fear that he would be assassinated. However, he still held public office. In 1962, he was the chairman of the Mississippi State Game and Fish Commission. Now, in February of 1962, Black student James Meredith tried to register at Ole Miss. The governor, Ross Barnett, a segregationist, was against it and promised the full assistance of state law enforcement to keep him from registering. And then, Clarence Strider had to make an announcement that he had 250 supervisors and game wardens ready to go to Ole Miss to keep it white, should they be needed. And if that's not good enough, 3 years later in 1965, Strider won a special election to the state Senate, and he actually served there for 5 years. He served on various different committees, including the Penitentiaries Committee, which is terrifying if you think about it. In 1966, he actually co-sponsored a bill to relocate Mississippi blacks to other states. Again, co-sponsored a bill to relocate Black citizens of Mississippi to other states. Obviously, nothing ever came out of that proposal. On December 27th of 1970, Clarence Strider died of a heart attack while he was out on a deer hunt. And, because of course, in 1981, a portion of Mississippi Highway 32 was designated as the Henry Clarence Strider Memorial Highway. J.W. Milam lived on a farm after the trial. He retired from the Army and he had no job. It was widely reported that he was actually seen waiting in a welfare line for rations. One of his lawyers, John Whitten, was actually on the loan committee of a local bank, so JW was able to get a small $4,000 loan to buy a very, very small tract of land. However, it didn't work out. No one would work for him. So he actually had to pay white people at a much higher rate and then went broke. He and his wife Juanita moved to Texas for a couple of years, but returned back to Mississippi. JW was arrested multiple times for fraud and for writing bad checks, and also actually spent some time in jail. J.W. Milam died of cancer on New Year's Eve of 1980. Juanita never remarried. Although it's rumored that J.W. and Juanita had divorced at some point, they did not. They stayed together. Juanita worked at the Greenville Beauty Salon for more than 30 years, actually until 1990, and she was known for constantly seeming depressed. Like she just had no joy whatsoever. She didn't keep in touch with Carolyn or Roy Bryant after J.W. died in 1980. And remember, J.W. Milam was Roy Bryant's half-brother. So in the late 1980s, there was a funeral for one of their common relatives, and the three ran into each other. Roy and Carolyn Bryant, and then also Juanita was there. Apparently, there was an argument between the Bryant side and the Milam side on which side, Roy or J.W. deserved more blame for Emmett Till's death. Juanita was seen storming out, just angry and not wanting to be a part of it. The interesting part is that Juanita herself was actually politically liberal. She was a registered Democrat. She had many black friends. She was pro-LGBT, pro-gay rights, pro-gay marriage, and pro-women's rights. In 2008, she had a stroke and her health began to deteriorate. She died in Ocean Springs, Mississippi at age 86. Leslie Milam, J.W. Milam's brother and the owner of the plantation where Emmett was tortured, was actually run out of town just a few months after the trial because none of the black sharecroppers would work on his plantation. He ended up holding menial jobs at nearby plantations for years after. In 1971, he was arrested for possessing methamphetamine and fined. Just 4 months after that, he was caught in possession of more than 500 methamphetamine pills, basically speed. He was sentenced to 1 year at Parchman State Prison. His attorney in this case was J.W. Kellum, an attorney from J.W. Milam's original defense team. Apparently, later in his life, when he was on his deathbed, his wife called for a preacher to come, and Leslie Milam admitted to having been there at Emmett Till's death, and he said that it haunted him until the day that he died and that he had to get it off of his chest. Apparently, out of every single person involved in this entire thing, Leslie Milam is the only one who even held a modicum of remorse. Roy Bryant also had a difficult time after the trial. Boycotts led him to close his family grocery store just 3 weeks after the trial ended. So Roy moved his family, Carolyn, the kids, to Indiana, where he became a mechanic. And then he actually applied as a police officer. When news began to circulate that Roy Bryant was a police officer, the news media actually picked up on that, and they contacted the small town in Indiana and asked them if he was on the force. The police department was literally like, "Thank you for calling. He applied. We turned him down. Hell no." So it is unknown at this moment if Roy did actually become a police officer at any point, but he didn't from the one particular county where it was rumored that he was. Eventually, he became a welder, and then he moved his family from Indiana to Texas and then to Louisiana, then back to Mississippi. Because of his time welding, he went mostly blind. And upon his return to Mississippi, he ended up taking over a small grocery store that was being run by his family members. After they came back to Mississippi, Roy and Carolyn began to have severe marriage problems. Surprise, surprise, Roy Bryant was a violent alcoholic and severely abused Carolyn, physically, sexually, mentally, and emotionally. On August 15th, 1974, Carolyn left Roy and then filed for divorce. Their divorce papers state that Roy was guilty of, quote, habitual cruel and inhuman treatment of her and habitual drunkenness. In 1977, Roy and his brother ran for county alderman seats and lost horribly. They actually got the least amount of votes of like the dozen or more people who ran. The next year, he was caught committing food stamp fraud and narrowly avoided jail time. Of course, not learning his lesson, he was found guilty of it again in 1988 and actually ended up serving 8 months of a 2-year term. In 1993, Roy Bryant developed both cancer and diabetes. He agreed to sit down with a journalist from the Palm Beach Post to talk about the Emmett Till case, and he said nonchalantly, quote, "It was just something in the past. You have to leave it alone, live your life. You can't just sit around and cry over spilt milk." Delighting pretty much everyone, Roy Bryant died of cancer on September 1st, 1994. And that brings us to Carolyn Bryant. Today, Carolyn Bryant is 88 years old. After the trial, as I said, she moved around with Roy Bryant and took the brunt of his drunken abuse before divorcing him in 1974. Because she had the measles during her daughter's pregnancy, her daughter was born deaf. So, Carolyn learned American Sign Language. She remained a housewife for most of her life and made jewelry on the side for some extra money up into the early 2000s. She was seen at local arts and crafts shows. Carolyn is deeply religious. 2 of her sons died prematurely, and she now has a living son and a living daughter. It's unclear how many times that she's been married, but at least 3, possibly 4. But after her most recent husband died, his name was Frank, she actually sold her home in Mississippi and moved to Raleigh, North Carolina to live with her son. That's where she's from now. Her last husband's name was Frank Dunham, and so now Carolyn goes by Carolyn Bryant Dunham. Carolyn agreed to write her memoir with her daughter-in-law and began that process back in the early 2000s, late 1990s. But it actually ended up not being fully realized, or so we thought. From 2004 to 2005, the FBI again investigated the Emmett Till case and actually focused on Carolyn this time. They actually spent hours interviewing her over the course of 2 different sessions. In one interview with the FBI, she said that Emmett Till accosted her and that, quote, "As soon as he touched me, I started screaming for Juanita." Now, when she gave her original testimony in the 1955 trial, which you can read, the link is on the previous episode in the show notes, there was no screaming in that testimony. She did not scream, and she never called for Juanita in that testimony. In February of 2007, the district attorney for the county where Emmett Till was murdered called for a grand jury to hear evidence against Carolyn, as she was up at that time for possible manslaughter charges. However, the racially diverse grand jury failed to indict, citing lack of evidence. In 2008, a year after the grand jury, her daughter-in-law arranged a meeting with a historian named Tim Tyson. Now, what happened in this meeting is complex and honestly unknown. Like, no one knows exactly what did really happen. Tim Tyson claims that Carolyn admits to having lied about Emmett Till touching her in the grocery store back in 1955. Carolyn's daughter-in-law claims that she was sitting right there during that entire conversation and that she never recanted that. Apparently, Carolyn made the statement as Tyson was setting up his recorder, so it was not caught on audio. She allegedly said, quote, "Honestly, I just don't remember. It was 50 years ago. You tell these stories for so long that they seem true, but that part is not true." In 2010, Carolyn Bryant was on Facebook using a pseudonym, a different name, so that she would not be recognized. Late last month in June, like we're talking here, June 2022, researchers who were looking into the Till case discovered an unserved arrest warrant for Carolyn Bryant Dunham in the basement of a Mississippi courthouse. The charge? Kidnapping. In Carolyn Bryant's original statement she gave in 1955, she said, quote, "I did not go to this Negro's house." She claimed that Roy Bryant and J.W. Milam brought Emmett Till to her in their home to identify. However, multiple eyewitnesses placed Carolyn in the passenger side of that pickup truck with Roy and J.W. the night of Emmett's kidnapping. Before they picked up Emmett, Roy and J.W. had actually picked up a different black man. After looking at him, Carolyn had said, "This isn't the right N-word." And just over a week ago, some pages from her unpublished memoir were made public. And it's shocking to say the least. Tim Tyson, that historian, has been holding on to a draft copy of Carolyn's memoir with an agreed-upon release date of 2036. Basically, Carolyn Bryant wanted to be dead before its release. She wanted it released posthumously. Tim Tyson had actually already provided a copy of it to the FBI back in 2005 and then again in 2017. However, once the Mississippi research team found that unsealed warrant last month, Tyson was disgusted and appalled. So this very week, he began to email copies of the memoir out to different press outlets. He told CNN in an interview, quote, "I decided that if there was going to be a reinvestigation, that criminal justice outweighs the archival agreement." Carolyn herself has known about the warrant since 2005. The FBI has known about the warrant since basically forever. They told her about the warrant. In an excerpt from her memoir, she wrote, quote, "Decades later, when I was being interviewed by the FBI, I found out that there was also a warrant for my arrest, but they didn't arrest me. In fact, at the time, they didn't even tell me that there was a warrant. The FBI told me that there was a warrant for kidnapping. I was surprised when he showed it to me. The person that filed the kidnapping charges said there was a soft voice in the truck, but they didn't see who it was. I guess the sheriff thought it was me. I was never arrested or charged with anything." Carolyn Bryant is still alive and now 88 years old. The warrant for her arrest is still active. I repeat, the warrant for her arrest is still active because there is no statute of limitations when it comes to kidnapping. Emmett Till's family has hired an attorney who in turn has submitted a letter to Mississippi's 4th District Court District Attorney asking them to prosecute Carolyn Bryant Denham. And so far, they have not heard back. And that's where we stand as of July of 2022, guys. And I want to know, because I've seen some pretty polarizing opinions and thoughts on this. Do you think Carolyn Bryant should face justice for Emmett Till's kidnapping? Do you think she should be left alone and allowed to live out her remaining days? I've seen a wide variety of opinions all over social media, so I want to know what you think. Shoot us an email over to info@wesawthedevil.com or leave a comment in the episode post on Instagram or Facebook. But thank you for listening to this entire series. It has been just absolutely heartbreaking being in this and spending like 50, 60, 70 hours researching this and reading multiple books and whatnot. I've learned a lot, and it's been absolutely devastating to hear all of these additional details and understanding a great deal more than I did in middle school when we lightly touched on it. You've been listening to We Saw the Devil. I'm Robin. Thank you for listening, and please check out our website at wesawthedevil.com, where you can follow us on social media, send us an email, or even check out our Patreon if you'd like to financially back the show. See you next week, everyone. Until next crime.